Welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast by Third Wave. Today I am speaking with John Wood, the founder of Rageheart.
The autonomic nervous system, which is where all this is held, runs the skin, the breathing, all kinds of different important functions in the body. So if you jam that up with a bunch of stress from years, decades gone by, it doesn't work so well. So we have a racing mind. You start to have skin problems, digestive problems, autoimmune disorders. It causes all kinds of things. So it's really not just about the mind. There's a lot of physical stuff that happens too. So the way of working somatically is we can start to work directly with the nervous system. Instead of journaling about it, what happened to us, or talking to a therapist about what happened to us, or just trying not to think about it, which some meditation techniques teach. It's, okay, how do we build capacity in the nervous system so these old charges, this old survival stress that's stuck and hidden and they would say frozen, can start to come up and release.
Hey listeners, I'm so excited to have John Wood on the podcast today. I know John from my days back in Chiang Mai, Thailand, many years ago. He's a copywriter, an internet marketer, and now a somatic healer. About a year or so ago, he moved to the Sacred Valley in Peru and started working extensively with plant medicine, ayahuasca, wachuma, and through his work with plant medicine and also his background in somatic experiencing, he has developed a novel way to unleash the beast, so to say, to tap into that wild side, to allow for it to unfold and to actually leverage the shadow that comes up for creativity, leadership, purpose, awareness, et cetera, et cetera. So we talk a lot about John's journey coming into this. We talk about how he was manipulated and brainwashed by a couple healers in Thailand, which is going to be a really good sort of warning story for how do we vet people who we're letting into our lives when we work with psychedelics. And then we talk about the process that he has created and that he's starting to amplify through an online course that he's put together. So key highlights and takeaways are going to be around what is the role of somatics when working with plant medicine? How do we allow for the deepest parts of ourselves to emerge without them overtaking our nervous system? We talk about vetting, guides, therapists. How do we cultivate trust, especially when we're working with boundary dissolving substances? All in all, a phenomenal conversation. John and I have had many conversations prior to this, and so this is just sort of another evolution of our relationship. I think you'll really enjoy this podcast. All right. That's it for now. Let's dive into this episode. I hope you enjoy my conversation with John Wood. We met how many years ago now? 7? 8? Almost 8 years ago. Christmas at Pi, right? Christmas at Pi.
Was Christmas in Pi the first time?
2014.
2014.
We're now recording this December 14th, 2022.
8 years. Well, there we go. Yeah, 8 years. Right on 8 years.
Who was John 8 years ago? Bring us a little bit into why you found yourself in Chiang Mai, what had brought you there, maybe what you found to be exciting and interesting at that point in your life. I think that would be a good context to start with.
Yeah, well, I was originally from Sydney, Australia, read the 4-hour work week somewhere along the way and knew I didn't want to go to college or university or have the normal quote unquote normal life, and eventually found an internship in the Philippines working for a couple beach resort there, a couple different resorts, doing their marketing and in exchange for food and board and that kind of a thing. So I went there, lived there for a year. Following that, I went to Thailand for a conference, DC Bangkok, which we've both been a part of. And then after that, it was, where do I go next? Do I go back to Australia? Do I go somewhere? And a whole bunch of people were going up to Chiang Mai, which is an hour north of Bangkok on the plane. So I went to Chiang Mai, got a little studio apartment, settled in, and spent most of the last 10 years there. I was there for 2 or 3 years, 24. So that was 2012, I think, was when that first DC Bangkok was. So I was in Chiang Mai at the end of 2012. And then we met, I guess, in Christmas 2014, so 2 years later. So as for what I was all about back then, man, it was all business. It was all, let's try and make money. Let's, create freedom. Let's go on motorbike rides. one of the things I loved about Chiang Mai was the motorbike. So we'd go and get like a bunch of big bikes, 500s, 700s, and just go off roaming around the mountains for a whole weekend, doing some stupid things at times, seeing how fast we could go, just because why not? I remember one friend I was with, we both know him. I don't know if I should say his name on a big public podcast like this, though, but he accidentally did a wheelie. You probably know who I'm talking about. He accidentally did a wheelie across an intersection because we were just sitting there being dicks, revving our motorbikes, right, to see who has the loudest bike. Just so stupid. And then he happened to let the clutch out, I think, by accident. So his front wheel pops up and he's, up and down and up and down, up and down. And he kind of curves away and goes into oncoming traffic. And luckily ends up going between the median strip and a truck. And by this point, we've all got adrenaline pumping because we thought he was about to die. And anyway, that was just one random thing that happened on our motorbike adventures. But Chiang Mai, I mean, you've got mountains, you've got waterfalls. Plenty of times relating to psychedelics, we would go and do, we used to call them hikeadelics. Me and some friends, where we'd go and meet up at 8 a.m. on a Saturday, get some LSD or some mushrooms, and just go hiking up into the mountains. And the cool thing about Chiang Mai is you've got Doi Sutep, which is the main mountain, the mountain that the town is next to. And we just hike up. We'd take our mushrooms or LSD, we'd hike up and have some adventure. And then we'd come back. Whenever the sun started going down and it seemed like time to go home, we would start walking down. And sometimes that went smoothly because we found a trail and we got down before it was dark. And other times we would end up in the most random places, the back of someone's farm, way on top of the mountain. And it's, the sun's just dropped below the horizon and we've still got to go another few miles to get down to the town. So, good times.
Chiang Mai.
What did you like in Chiang Mai?
Oh, I mean, when I moved to Chiang Mai in 2014, I just launched a teaching English business. Like the website had just gotten up. I shot a lot of videos. I was teaching quite a bit and coaching people quite a bit. I loved how inexpensive it was. I think my apartment was $150 a month, and I could go across the street, and I think it was 30 baht to get a chicken curry, and then each egg was like 5 baht, and I think at that point it was like 30 baht to $1, maybe something like that. So just like you get lunch for $1.50. CrossFit gym was right down the road. So this is also around the same time that I started microdosing LSD. So I would take a microdose, hop on the motorbike, and go to CrossFit at the end of the day. And then the community of people, the group of folks that we ended up getting to know and hanging out with and spending time with. There were a lot of good folks there. And it was really the start of my entrepreneurial journey. And even, around the time that I started to microdose and think about third wave and sort of, it was at the genesis of all of that. It was never going to be a place. I know there are still friends of ours or people that we know who are still in Bangkok or maybe still in Chiang Mai. It was never going to be a place for the long term. It really just felt like a temporary launching pad. But I'm really grateful that I ended up spending time there, living there. It made it easy to be an entrepreneur and not have sort of the overwhelming stress of finances, knocking at my door, which then allowed me to do things and create things that weren't immediately driven by finances, but had a much more sort of long-term vision of what it is that wanted to be created.
Mm-hmm.
When did you find yourself sort of wanting something else? So, you're spending a lot of time in Asia and the Philippines and Chiang Mai. At that point in time, you were doing quite a bit of copywriting, email copywriting in particular. And now you live in so just as a kind of contextual polarization, where do you live now and what are you doing now, in 2022? And kind of track for us how you went from being an email copywriter living on beach resorts in Asia to doing deep medicine work in the Sacred Valley in Peru. Pretty standard.
So you gave it away. I'm in the Sacred Valley in Peru, about an hour and a half from Cusco. But there's actually some crazy protests going on at the moment. I'm meant to be flying on Saturday to the beach, but all the roads to Cusco are shut down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Protests
there's been.
around because of the corruption, the government corruption recently.
I don't really follow politics too much. I read a few articles, and it's something to do with the
Okay.
old president
The
was
prime
impeached,
minister.
tried some stuff, and then there's a new one
Yeah.
in, and there's old supporters of the old one, or blah blah blah. Good old politics. So, but anyway, what they do here is they put rocks and trees across the road to stop you driving. And if I go out on my motorbike to try and get to the airport, they'll probably throw rocks at me. So that's what's going on in Peru right now. So I'm in the Sacred Valley, I'm actually here with my sister, Ellie, and we live down the road from the retreat center where we've been drinking ayahuasca, San Pedro as well, around the corner. I've been doing Jiu Jitsu while I've been here. But really, it's been I came here to, like you said, to do some deep medicine work, to get further into psychedelics and plant medicine. But as for how that happened, like how do you go from, like you said, living on the beach in Asia to living in Peru, drinking ayahuasca semi-regularly? It's, it depends how many details you want. So in Thailand, I actually started dating a girl in Thailand around 2016.
The more details, the better. I think at this point, the more details, the better.
Yeah. So I think it was around 2016, started dating this chick. We're no longer together, but really amazing girl. And we started smoking a lot of weed together. That was one thing we did. MDMA, LSD, doing different things like that, exploring these different things. And sort of while doing that, I got into a book called, I think, The Presence Process, which is just about breathing, staying very present with your breath, and then allowing emotions to flow through you. And that opened up some things in me that I hadn't previously been aware of. It's a very complicated book, to be honest. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone these days, but it kind of got me into this idea of there's things that we're carrying in our body, in our system, that are holding us back, and it's not by thinking about it, it's by breathing and feeling that things start to shift. And so I started using some of these techniques with psychedelics. Somewhere along the way, I think it was 2018, I took a meditation technique, and we're in the place called the Canyon, I think, in Pai, with my girlfriend at the time. He took a couple tabs of acid, and I started playing with this technique, and something like, it's probably the first time I've had what I would call a spiritual experience, where it's like the mind just completely fell away. It was the first time I'd had one of those openings. And it was, it's like I had some kind of spidey sense that there was something there. That's why I was playing with that technique in the first place. But then to do it with a psychedelic was and to have that thing open up blew my mind at the time. And then it happened, I think, again, a month or two later with mushrooms. Similar, different, but similar at the same time too. A lot of it revolved around the mind falling away and then an experience of reality beyond concepts, which to someone who's never had that probably doesn't make any sense. To someone who has, they're going to get it straight away. But it's something that I think a very common, I don't know about common, but it's certainly a thing that happens with people with psychedelics. So this started to happen, and it's like I started to become aware that there was a whole reality that up until that point, I hadn't been aware of because my mind had gotten in the way. And I'd finish those experiences and come out of them, and the window would close up. I'd come back to my day-to-day normal reality. But what it did do was it showed me there was more out there than making money, having a business, traveling the world, going on dates, different things like that. And I think around that time, there was definitely like a feeling of, what's the point of all this? Like, I've got a business, I've got more freedom than most people, dream of. I can live anywhere in the world. I make great money. I can really just I have this incredible life, and yet something's missing. Something's not, and I didn't really know what it was. I couldn't put my finger on it. A lack of fulfillment or a lack of purpose, maybe. But then as these experiences started coming through with psychedelics, it's like, okay, I want more of that. Whatever that is, whatever this sense of fulfillment that resides inside me, like I don't have that all the time, but just these little glimpses were enough for me to go, okay, there's something here. There's something that I need to like explore and figure out how to, just to bring more of that into my life and even more of that into the world, because I could see that other people are doing the same thing. They're going and searching all the way outside them for all these different things, not realizing that what we really want is very often, it's so cheesy, is inside of us. So that was 2018 with the LSD and the mushrooms. And then went back to Australia around that time, drank ayahuasca, had another Again, similar but different, much more. It was the most intense experience of that dissolving kind of state. There's not really much I can say about it other than it's a very enjoyable place to be. But what was happening was this, I guess, trend as I started exploring these psychedelics in a more spiritual, healing, personal development kind of way instead of just tripping. I became, I wouldn't say happier at first, but what I had was hope, I suppose. Hope that there was more than what I'd been sold as like, this is life. You make your money and you have your business and you do all the different things. So by that point, by the time I did ayahuasca in Australia and had that experience again, I think I was basically sold. I'm like, whatever this is, I don't know where it's going. I don't really know what it's all about, but I'm in. I'm like 110% in to whatever this path, this journey is. And from there, that was 2018. I think over the next few years, it was pretty rough, man. Like, because as you start opening up, as I started opening up to some of these different aspects of reality, it sort of called into question everything I was doing, where it's like, what do I need like to come back from some of those experiences and then go, okay, I've got to make money now and I've got to pay bills and I've got to eat food and just live, do normal life stuff, the mundane stuff of life. It was quite difficult for a long time of trying to, it felt so out of alignment. I became aware of this beautiful part inside me, of beautiful aspect of life. And yet I was doing things like my work wasn't really aligned with what I wanted to be doing. It wasn't what I was passionate about. It was just a way to make money, There was people that I had in my life more so around 2019, 2020 who ended up being very dangerous and manipulative. I wrote an article about it. We can go into it if you want. I know you've read it. And so there was a lot, a few things just happening that really, like, I wasn't happy. As much as I'd had these beautiful things that had happened with psychedelics, I still wasn't happy or fulfilled, but I was searching. And so I think it was around 2020, I drank ayahuasca a few more times. I'd taken LSD. I'd done more psychedelics, right? And then 2020, I'd been working with these coaches the year before, and I signed up with them because I was helping them with some of their marketing, because that's my background and expertise. I'd help them with their marketing. They'd help me with healing, personal development, psychedelics, blah, blah, blah. And they showed me an ad one day, a Facebook ad that said, "Get unstuck and on purpose." And I'm like, it's just something about it landed. I'm like, that's exactly what I want. Like, I feel kind of stuck and I feel like I'm not doing what I want to be doing. So that sold me, even though I was helping them with the marketing. I decided to sign up with them. And that led to a few coaching calls, which were not too much to talk about. There's not too much happened with them. Some weird stuff, I suppose. And then we did a mushroom ceremony. And I don't know how deep you want to get into the details, but they told me during this mushroom ceremony, where they were meant to be helping me, they told me that I'd killed 20 million people in a past life, that I had therefore had, I think, 18 million locks on my power, because 18 million of these dead people were innocent. 2 million of them deserved it. So 18 million locks on my power. And the dude, because it was a married couple, the dude started to unlock me, and then these beings that he's somehow talking to via a psychedelic walkie-talkie, aliens, he's speaking an alien language. It's pretty trippy to have this happen on mushrooms. And he's starting to supposedly unlock me. And they tell him, no, he's too dangerous. You can't unlock him. So they created this whole thing where it was like, John, you're a terrible, horrible person. You're committed genocide in a past life, and you're way too dangerous for us to release you. And there was other stuff in there. They told me I was arrogant. The whole thing, in retrospect, I realized that it was basically trying to undermine who I was, which is a thing cults do and manipulative people do. They make you feel bad about who you are, so then you're more likely to trust them, because they're like, well, we'll fix you. So that happened. And then for a few months after that, I blamed myself. I felt, I did that thing where I'm like, oh, I'm just projecting. If I'm upset with them, it's my problem. I've got some issue that I need to work through. And then in 2020, my sister told me something. She just started seeing, she'd been working through some stuff too. And she just started seeing a somatic therapist. And I didn't really know much about it at the time, but she told me some of her experiences of going into the body and feeling things and what that had done for her. And something clicked, something sparked in me. I'm like, that's like in the presence process and the psychedelics and all the different books I've read, the surrender experiment, all this stuff about learning to feel. It felt like this somatic thing that she'd gotten into was all of that put together times 100. So I started Googling what she told me about in relation to something. It was TRE, that shaking thing where you learn to activate the body's shaking response. That led me to feel free to interrupt me at any time. I don't know if I can just keep going. um,
Well, we're reaching a transition point now, and so I think first to not even double back, but just hold a little space for like what you went through with the couple in, I believe it
mhm.
was in Chiang Mai in
Uh-huh.
Thailand, right? And we
Uh-huh.
can link out to that story in the podcast notes. I think just to contextualize this for everyone who's listening, there's certainly a dark side to psychedelic work in that psychedelics significantly enhance suggestibility, right? And so when you're under the influence of, let's say, psychedelic mushrooms, there can be a propensity or a tendency to believe things that normally you wouldn't believe in everyday waking consciousness, which it's basically, it's like a knife in that way. It's a double-edged sword, because that can be really helpful because it can help to clear limiting beliefs. But like you said, it can also be utilized for bad, for sort of nefarious purposes, which based on your story and sort of the context that you provided, it seems like that's what you unfortunately went through. And I think it speaks to, not to be too abstract from kind of the personal experience that you went through, but it speaks to the importance of, really, really checking, especially if committing to doing a ceremony or a coaching container or anything like this, having some sort of accountability or trust that's established with anyone that you submit to in that way, I think is important. And it's part of what we're attempting to do with Third Wave and the Discovery platform, is how do we ensure that only ethical and well-meaning and skilled providers are amplified, because the risk of amplifying unethical providers is significant. In fact, it can be re-traumatizing or even more traumatizing. I mean, I'm just curious from your lens, like, as you went into that process, and then as you came out of that process, what are some of the learnings that you had in terms of, how to check providers, how to understand who you're working with, how to know what you're getting into, right? It's sort of any words of wisdom for those who are listening, so they don't necessarily make the same mistake that you went through.
Oh, what's interesting is, I mean, I signed up with them in, I think it was October 2019. And I'd been friends with him since, I think we met in February that year in Chiang Mai. We met through a business networking group. We'd both taken like a coaching program together. So we met up, we found out we were in Chiang Mai together. We went out for dinner, and they seemed great. We had great conversation. We seemed to be interested in the same thing, psychedelics. They knew the presence process, like a lot of the same stuff that we were working on. It's just very, very similar. So very typical of friends, right? Common interests. And then over the, following the rest of the year, really, me and took my girlfriend at the time to meet them, and they became friends. So we'd go around to their house, we'd play with their kids, we'd go for dinner and lunch, and we'd spent quite a lot of time together, talking quite a lot on WhatsApp. And what's funny is when I look back, I remember at the time when the whole thing blew up. When I looked back on how I felt about them in the time getting to know them, I had a funny feeling. And it wasn't much. It wasn't like verbalized. They never did anything explicit or outright to make me think that they're dangerous or they're manipulative. But there were little tells, little things that they would say, I'd be a bit like, oh, just like, oh, that's how I describe it now. Like sometimes people say stuff and something in me is like, I don't know exactly what's wrong with that, but I can feel it. Something in my body is like, it just doesn't land properly for me. And so there was that before I hired them. And because of now, also in retrospect, looking back, I know it's because of some stuff I went through as a kid. I didn't trust that. I overrode that. And was like, no, it's not, that's just my issue. I'm just projecting. It's not that big of a deal. Blah, like I rationalized my funny feeling away. Very common thing that people do for different reasons. And so what I would say is, what I do now as well, if I feel that feeling with someone, I'm like, that to me is the sign to like be absolutely on my guard. to be paying attention, because like something's probably happening, and the body starts to notice it before the mind does. And so, like, an example of how that's played out is, remember, I was out. This is a year or two after this whole thing happened with them. I'm out to dinner with some people, and one of the dudes at this dinner, he was telling a story about a monk in Thailand. And I found myself being drawn in. Like, I was like, well, tell me more. Like, what about this? And like, what does he do? And blah, blah. And the way the guy was playing it was, the more I asked the questions, he'd be like, no, you're not ready for this. Like, this isn't really your thing. Like, you need more practice, or more, like, it was sort of like I didn't realize it, but at some point I'm like, he's pissing me off. Like, I'm getting angry. Like, I can feel it. I'm getting fucking annoyed at this dude. And at first there's that tendency to be like, oh no, it's just me. I mean, he's just triggering me, rah, rah, rah. And at some point I'm like, no, he's not triggering me like some issue that I have from my past. This anger that I'm feeling, that's that funny feeling again. It's like my body saying, look, pay attention. This dude's messing with you. And it may not be, in his case, it wasn't really that dangerous. We're just at dinner. I'm not working with him. He doesn't have any power over me other than that conversation. But it's learning to, like, for me, it was learning to trust these signals. If I start to feel that, whether it's fear or anger, some of these things are very powerful, very important signals for me to listen to. And sometimes it is, I've been triggered from the past. Something happened when I was a kid and that got triggered. Absolutely. But I think culturally, it's like we've swung too far in that direction, where people will say that, like, you get angry with something, they're like, no, you're just projecting. It's a way people gaslight, and that's what these people did to me. And if we're not careful, we start to distrust ourselves and we trust this other person. And so that was one of the big lessons in this whole experience, was trusting these feelings, no matter how subtle they are, no matter how much they don't make sense, to listen to them. Doesn't mean I get rid of the person entirely, but at the very least, I start to maybe pull back a little bit, and I start to look very carefully and just watch. And just that alone can be enough to, like, that's a huge protection just in that. So that's one thing. I can share more
Well,
things.
It's a boundary, right? Like, anger at times can be a boundary to set. It's evolutionarily an important emotion, because it allows us to know when to say no and when to push back. And yet, I think what I'm hearing in your story as well is, and we'll probably get into this as the episode goes on, is, there is a sense that you are, and I think this is true for a lot of Australians, there may be a sense of a lot of repressed anger inside of you, right? Mm-hmm. And so contextualizing, it's interesting. I just read one of my favorite books is a book called A Little Book on the Human Shadow. It's by Robert Bly, who is sort of this, he wrote Iron John. It's kind of the forefather of modern male masculinity, right? One of the best poets in the last 50 years in the States. And he talks about how, with anger, we can neither repress it, the shadow of it, but we can also not let it completely overtake us, because the rewiring, if we just fully feel the anger and fully express it, that's actually can be just as detrimental or harmful as repressing, fully repressing the anger. And so there's what he talks about is the way to work with anger. The way that artists work with anger is they alchemize anger into creation. They alchemize anger into art. They alchemize anger into an expression that may be comical, or that may be, something that allows it to be played with, but not to overtake and overwhelm and sort of overcome our senses and emotions. And it feels like that's the balance that you're speaking to. And that's the listening process of when we are triggered, or if anger is stirred up, right? It is that process of being with it, allowing it, but not necessarily kind of being mindful of how to work with it. And again, not repressing it, but also, not just socking someone in the face if they end up pissing you off, right? There's a sophistication in a way. There's a classy way to work with anger, in other words.
You could call it that, yeah. I mean, in the somatic world, the nervous system world of working with this stuff, you could say someone who, if it's completely suppressed, and this is probably more what it was like for me, when I was in Thailand 5 years ago, I remember the girl I was dating, she'd say, do you ever get angry? Are you an angry person? I'm like, no, not really. No, I don't really get angry. Like, sometimes I get annoyed at people when I'm driving, but it's pretty short-lived. Like, it's not a big deal. I'm just not an angry person. And we'd have a fight, right? And she'd be angry with me about something, and I would just be taking deep breaths, and I would I would think I'm just staying calm, like I'm just really zen, I'm like, I'm really good at just staying calm. And I realized around the time we broke up, actually, which is when this whole thing went down with these coaches, was no, I had a lot of anger. I just didn't express it. I didn't tell people about it. I didn't even feel it myself, right? So I couldn't tell them about it because I didn't think I was angry in the first place. So that's one extreme of being suppressed, like you said, thinking that, oh, I'm just not an angry person, where there's just no anger at all. And the other extreme is what you're talking about, like some completely out of control, where they get angry and they break things. They break someone's face. They throw things at the wall. That's the other extreme. So it's kind of like the healthy place is somewhere in the middle, where it's like it's not suppressed, that we absolutely feel it and we express it, but where it's not out of control. We don't hurt people with it. Yeah, it's a classy way to use anger, as you said.
So tell us a little bit then about the somatic stuff. We've had a few people on the podcast before talk about somatic experiencing. A lot of what psychedelics teach, like you said, is that process of feeling emotion in the body, feeling where anger arises or shame arises or guilt arises or sadness or whatever it is. And it sounds like, in some of the conversations that we had leading up to this podcast, you've had an opportunity to kind of formulate your own framework around psychedelics for somatic experiencing. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that framework, maybe how you've seen it play out in real time in your own ayahuasca work, kind of what that looks like, what that feels like. I'll just open up that for our listeners.
Well, that's what sort of saved me, I believe, from these coaches, because it was around that time my sister told me about it. I looked it up, found a couple of courses, started working with these different techniques, which are really about, some people might hear about them and go, that's just mindfulness. But to me, it's so much more than that. And the whole thing, part of it really rests on the foundation, the theory of the nervous system. So this idea of, people talk about, breathing and feeling stuff. And it was like, okay, I kind of get it. It sort of makes sense. But why? Why is it even there in the first place? Why is this even a thing? Because if we can understand that, we can have a better understanding of how to move it, which is what maestros are doing in ayahuasca ceremonies, for example. But the whole thing is based on the idea that we have a stress response, right? When there's a threat, well, let's say we're all peaceful, we're comfortable, we're relaxed, we're talking with friends, and then there's a noise, like a really big bang. We call this orienting in the nervous system thing. First thing we'll do is we'll orient towards the sound. They call this defensive orienting. We're orienting towards it to find out if it's a threat. And if it's not, if it was just like some thunder in the distance, we might, okay, just thunder. It's all very quickly. We're not necessarily thinking about it. The system relaxes. But if we determine that it's a bomb or it's a tiger or some form of a threat to our safety, we'll go into fight or flight, which means we either want to run away from the threat, if we can, to get back to safety, or we're going to fight, we're going to attack the threat to neutralize it. Either way, it's still about safety. If we run away, we're going to run away to somewhere safe. If we attack the threat and neutralize it, we're doing that because once the threat's neutralized, we're now safe again. If we can't execute either of those strategies, what's happening is the body's generating, the nervous system's generating for it to power, for us to run away, or for us to fight someone off. What does that require? It requires energy, right? So we call this survival stress. It's adrenaline, it's cortisol, it's all the different things that happen in the body to mobilize that response. So if we're going to run away, it's going to take a lot of that energy. If we're going to fight it off, it's going to take that energy. If that process gets blocked, because basically what's happening is the energy gets generated or released by the body. And if we don't run away, or if we do run away, the system's going to go up and then it's going to come down like a bell curve, really nice bell curve. It's going to go up as the energy comes up. And then as we run away, it's going to get discharged and the whole response is going to come down. So we're going to go from relaxed to stressed out, back to relaxed. But what often happens, especially in the Western world, is that process doesn't complete. So you could imagine that happening with like a gazelle in the jungle. The gazelle gets chased by a cheetah, it runs away. But the same process happens with parents and kids, where it's like, let's say a parent yells at the kid gets upset. The kid wants to run away. The problem is the kid's 3 years old. So the kid's feeling a very strong fight or flight response. the energy's being released and it wants to do something, but it can't really run away because it's way too young. It can't survive on its own outside in the wild, the streets. But it can't really fight its parents off because the parents are bigger and stronger, and the parent just yelled at the kid. So that's the threat to the safety is too great for the child to neutralize it through fighting. So it can't run away and can't fight them off. That energy, that bell curve, it's gone up, it kind of gets stuck. And it's almost like that energy doesn't just magically disappear. If it's not expressed or discharged through movement, through action, could be painting a picture, I suppose, it kind of gets stuck in the nervous system. All right. So we're talking about the skin, the muscles, the fascia, and then it stays there and it kind of goes out of awareness. It can then start to live there or hide there and we forget about it. And then and this happens, this layers and layers and layers, right? All the different times this happens, bullies at school, teachers, stress at work, financial problems, blah, blah, blah. It's really just the stress of life. It builds up. And the more stressed it's filling the nervous system, the less capacity it has for what's going on right now. Because if it's, let's say it's the whole tank is filled up by 90% of stress from the past, it's only got a 10% capacity to deal with what's happening right now, which is not going to work too well. So to me, like this idea of, and then the idea of, to finish it off, I suppose we could say the autonomic nervous system, which is where all this is held, runs the skin, the breathing, all kinds of different important functions in the body. So if you jam that up with a bunch of stress from years, decades gone by, it doesn't work so well. So we have a racing mind. You start to have skin problems, digestive problems, autoimmune disorders. It causes all kinds of things. So it's really not just about the mind. There's a lot of physical stuff that happens too. And so the way of working somatically is we can start to work directly with the nervous system. Instead of journaling about it, what happened to us, or talking to a therapist about what happened to us, or just trying not to think about it, which some meditation techniques teach, it's okay, how do we build capacity in the nervous system so these old charges, this old survival stress that's stuck and hidden and they would say frozen, can start to come up and release. And to me, this is what the plants do. If you go into an ayahuasca ceremony, this is what an Icaro, they're singing. And it's almost like going into the body, into the system, finding these stuck charges, these stuck energy, shaking it up. And then it starts to come up. And if the person's ready for that, it'll come up. They can express it. They can purge it out through a number of ways. So that, to me, that piece of understanding the theory of it helps then leads to different techniques for how to work with it. So to go back to anger, for example, right? That's been a big thing for me, healthy aggression. The idea is that anger is just the fight response. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just one of the ways we will try and get to safety. So if someone's threatening us, we might get angry as a way to fight the attacker off or to assert a boundary, to do different things, with the idea that hopefully we get back to safety. But if this energy gets stuck in the system, like it did with me, you can end up being a person where, just like me, I'm like, oh, I'm just not an angry person. But then what happens is then I get into trouble with those coaches in Thailand, right? Because I'm not trusting that anger. I'm not feeling it. It makes me very vulnerable because that's a protective instinct. And so I traced it back from them. I was like, why did I get caught up with them? Like, what was so, like, in retrospect, it was so obvious that these people were not to be trusted, but yet I fell for it. And so as I traced it back, obviously it went back to childhood, to a figure in my childhood who would do something very similar, not with psychedelics, but this gaslighting, guilt tripping, minimization, various manipulative strategies. And so over time, I learned to shut that anger down and to hold it in, which is why then I get older in life, find myself in a situation like that where I can't protect myself. So how this worked out, how this played out somatically, was one day I just done a San Pedro weekend, and I remember walking away from that. Someone did like a chakra thing. I mean, like your throat chakra is all messed up. And I thought, thought about that or worked with that. I thought there was things I wasn't saying to this person in my life, a family member, that I was not saying, that I was holding in, right? And it's the tension in the throat, I suppose. So I took this to a guy I was working with at the time, a one-on-one somatic dude. And the other sensation that I remember having was this, it felt like there was a belt or a rope wrapped around my solar plexus and really, really tight. So my entire body, instead of being as wide at the solar plexus, as wide as the body, it's like the whole thing had been sucked in. So it was about as wide as a fist. And I told him about this, and his way of working with it, this is something I teach people in Rageheart, is, well, first he's like, okay, do a karate sound, like a ha. into that spot, almost like same idea as like an Icaro from a maestro in ayahuasca. It's using sound to dislodge something that's stuck. So we did that 5 or 10 times. And then after that, it's just like, just track it. Just put your awareness on that spot and just watch what happens. And don't take a deep breath, because that's another thing. Taking a deep breath can shut things down. So don't take a deep breath. Don't try and control it. Just feel. As soon as I felt into it, it starts moving up. All right, it starts moving into the chest. And it starts moving up into the throat. And as it gets to the bottom of the throat, my breathing has been increasing. So this is something that happens as we move as charges can start to come up. Sometimes our breathing will increase in its pace. And this is why taking a deep breath can be counterproductive, because we'll shut down the release. The breathing starts increasing. So it's right, in the same way that if I was about to get into a fight with someone, my breathing would probably increase. And then as it gets into the throat, I start to growl, or it starts being like, and it was quite a spontaneous thing. It's not something I was trying to do at the time. It just started happening. And the further up it got through the throat, eventually into the mouth and the face, it became very like, I want to show it just because it's like, it can be hard to imagine, but it was like I didn't even know a human could do that kind of a thing, but this started happening, right? And as it gets into the face, I started feeling like tingling, right, around the eyebrows and the cheeks and the lips. And I'd done, some training by this point. I knew that I had an idea of what was happening, that the way it had been explained to me is that when humans get angry, we're mammals, right? We're like dogs, we're like cats. You watch cats and dogs get angry. They don't write about it. They don't talk about it. They growl, right? Their eyes are going to narrow to focus on the threat, and they'll, they do something. It's a physical embodiment of the anger, a physical expression with their body of the aggression. And so that's the way I've been taught is, okay, when this starts to come up, you actually want to narrow your eyes, like you're focusing on a threat. You want to start to growl, allow yourself to growl, start to snarl, raise your upper lip. And so it's really start to embody anger and aggression the way an animal does. And it sounds silly. I've explained this to people before and they laugh at me. But having gone through it, there's this very strong sense that this energy it's literally coming out of me. Like it's not just a theater type of thing, a fun thing to do. I can feel it leaving the system. And when I just keep doing that enough, like the growling and all the different things, eventually it's like it burns itself out. And I don't have to stop breathe. I don't have to calm myself down. If I just keep going and going, eventually it's like the breathing will start to slow down a little bit. It's like the energy, the charge, whatever it was, starts to run out. The system will then start to reset itself. So that's anger. That's one way to work with aggression. I've had this happen here in the Valley during a San Pedro ceremony. I was drinking with this dude, Chase. And he's so funny. When I told him about the somatic stuff, he's so cynical. You could just tell. He's like, this is bullshit. This is absolute bullshit. Because I think he's had people come in talking about somatics in his ceremonies before. And he's like, they don't get it. Like they're not that solid in what they're doing with this work. So he didn't really believe in the somatic stuff. And then we did a retreat together. He was running it. And this aggression thing came through sometime during the ceremony. And so I went into, it was kind of the same kind of thing that I was talking about here, but that time I was in the garden somewhere. And so I added in some elements, right? One of it was some very loud growling. I had a towel or a blanket that was trying to rip in half. And the idea is that this aggression, this energy it's not something to just watch. It's like it wants to kill. That's what it feels like. It's the kind of energy that if I was going to kill someone, this is the kind of energy that would be flowing through my system. And so it needs an outlet. It's like it needs an outlet. It needs something to go into. So the way I was taught is get a blanket or get a towel and twist it up, try and rip it in half. You could do a baseball bat or something like that, but that's very like quick. Like it's sort of like once it's done, you're relaxing again. So even if you keep going and going and going, it's very staccato. As you get a blanket, you can just squeeze and rip that and put all the energy into that blanket. And Chase comes up afterwards when it's all done. At some point, he's watching me. I think I look around in the middle of it. He's like standing over there smoking a mapacho. I felt like I was like an animal in Africa or something, and he's David Attenborough narrating some documentary. But afterwards, he comes over to me. He's like, "What the hell was that, man?" And as I explained it to him, what I've told you guys here, about the somatics and the aggression and stuff like that. And he's like, "Oh, dude, it was cool, man. Like I could see." He said he could see the energy as I was doing, because it kind of comes in waves where it's like, and then I'd rest for however like a few seconds, and then it would come again. And he said, as this was happening, he could literally see. I suppose this is the maestros. You could see the energy leaving the body. So it's like he actually observed the technique actually doing purging from the system. It's like, what does that look like? I was like, I don't know, man, energy. He's not really a guy with words. But after that, he's like, oh, this somatic thing, like, oh, it actually, like, it's a thing. It actually works. But that's the idea, right? Energy from the past, stuck in the body, stuck in the nervous system, and then different techniques for getting it out, which are very different to, I think, what most people are used to when it comes to this kind of stuff.
And so why is it that, let's talk about the medicines in particular. Why is it that ayahuasca in particular can be very catalytic for somatic work, for kind of this primal, animalistic sort of allowance of the shadow?
Oh, in my experience, this is what a big part of what the plants are doing is cleaning. And the way they're cleaning is they're doing the same thing. They're finding this energy, this stuff from the past that's hiding in different places in the body and bringing it up. The challenge, though, with ayahuasca, San Pedro, I mean, all of them really. I haven't had the aggression come through with ayahuasca. It's been sort of seems to work in a slightly different way. But the basic thing is they're finding stuff in the body and trying to get it out. The challenge I think that a lot of people have or run into is they get in the way of that process. They end up thinking a lot, and I've done this plenty of times. But they think about what's going on, because usually that's what I notice is as the energy comes up, it can sometimes start to spin around in the mind, and then someone can spend hours thinking about what's happening instead of feeling it. And often the thinking just blocks the whole process from happening. Same thing with somatics. It's not about thinking about what's happening in the body. It's about literally just feeling it, noticing what the raw sensation is, right? So with ayahuasca, I remember the first time, I think I drank it home one day, and it was shortly after I'd started playing with the somatic stuff. And I started playing with a technique called the VU, where you go VU, and I start to go like VU, whoa, yo, whoa, whoa. So playing with different sounds. And the idea is with the somatics, you can use sound to drop from sympathetic, fight or flight, down into parasympathetic. And so I don't know what made me do it, but I started playing with that sound during ayahuasca. And it was like a holy shit moment. It's like, oh my God, I can like send this sound all over my body. So if there's like a tension somewhere, I can vibrate this sound into that spot and it starts to loosen it up. It's almost like the plants are bringing things up and trying to release them. But if I'm all tense and in my head, it sort of blocks the whole process. And I think it can make it a lot harder for the person, a lot scarier. Whereas if we have different techniques for knowing how, okay, if anger's coming up, well, this is how to work with it. This is one way to get it out of the body, right? And then instead of it building up, and it's almost like a dam, the pressure builds and builds and builds, it has an outlet. And sometimes the plants will do stuff, like ayahuasca will do stuff where it's just so intense, it's going to force its way out no matter what. But sometimes it's a bit subtler than that. And it's like having a tool, okay, if it's anger, this is one way to work with it. If it's fear, this is another way. There's different techniques for, okay, how do we move energy in the body? So they're very synergistic. Ayahuasca's doing it anyway. And I think people who work with the plants a lot, they learn some very similar, not everything is the same, but a lot of it's very similar. Like it's like the plants teach people the same stuff, among other things. And so they're fantastic on their own. But to me, you put them together, you give people these tools for navigating how to work with energy in themselves. And to me, it makes me really excited, because I think you can give people are going to get so much more out of psychedelics if they have these tools.
Have you done this with psilocybin or MDMA, or has it only been with ayahuasca and wachuma?
Yeah, I've just been with MDMA, iboga. I haven't done a flood dose of iboga, but I microdosed it. I think the most I've taken is 3 grams. Mushrooms, changa. Yeah, I've done it with most of them, except for probably the really obscure ones.
Do you find there's an idea, like how would you rank them in terms of ideal for somatic work and maybe not as ideal for somatic work?
I don't know. I don't know if I can. Yeah, I don't know if I could rank them. I mean, to me, I think I see like there's a real need for these kinds of tools. I came to the Valley thinking, oh, this is like psychedelic wonderland. Like everyone's going to get this stuff already. They're just going to know it because they're drinking plant medicine all the time. And all this stuff's going to be really basic to them. And I get over here and I'm like, no, there's plenty of people here who are still very stuck in their head, very mental. Um, and so I think whether it's MDMA or mushrooms or ayahuasca or San Pedro, like they're all different plants. And I think different people are going to resonate with different plants. Some do really well with San Pedro, some do better with ayahuasca, some love mushrooms. I can't do MDMA anymore because I've started dieting with the plants. So MDMA is just not going to vibe really well with that stuff. So there's, I think they all work. It's about finding the plant that probably works best for an individual, which is going to be them. They have to probably just explore on their own. But as far as the tools go, the somatic tools, I think it's going to help people across the board, whatever they do.
Have you tried this with 5-MeO DMT?
I haven't had 5-MeO yet. That's one thing I have not tried.
Because I know, like, when a lot of folks, especially their first couple times, they'll have, like, when I had a 5-MeO experience about a year ago, I did about 10 milligrams initially of the toad, which is a nice lighter dose, very euphoric. And then I did about 80 milligrams of the toad right after that. And I had this experience where I started to lay back, and then the energy of the medicine just literally pulled me on my feet, kind of stuck up my chest, and basically had a lion roar, like a deep sort of, oh yeah, it was intense for like 10 to 15 seconds. So there was something in sort of my root chakra, deep anger repression that was just stuck there that the 5-MeO went into, pulled out, and that energy pulled me up. And then after the anger came out, I just sort of like was Jiu Jitsu down by the facilitator, and then all this sadness came out, basically, right? Just cried for the next 15 to 20 minutes. And there was no capacity to navigate through it necessarily. There was no capacity, as you're saying, to be intentional about sort of the, having the blanket, right? When you're on 5-MeO, it's just full on. And so it almost makes me think, right? Like there could be a really, I see it as almost like a continuum where it's like you could do a little psychedelic and a lot of somatic work, a lot of intention behind the somatic work. You can do a little bit more psychedelic. It'll sort of intuitively develop your capacity for more somatic work. You can do even more psychedelic, and that will sort of just naturally continue to come out. And so there's got to be a way for even people who are listening to this, to think about what is that combination between, a microdose of or a mini dose of psilocybin and TRE, or a microdose or mini dose of psilocybin and, it could be even body work or structural integration, right? Something that allows for a release of the energetics in wherever that's experiencing, with an understanding that through that, the release of that emotion, there will be healing. There will be healing of whatever was stuck there, whatever trauma was stuck there, whatever story was stuck there, whatever else.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely an element of building capacity. Like, you go into 5-MeO and you've never done any of this stuff before. It's just going to be whatever it is, right? But even learning a little bit about somatics and then going and say drinking ayahuasca might, ayahuasca can be very intense. And so remembering how to do different things, use certain techniques, especially if it's still at a conscious, level, may not work so well. So the idea is, the way I would encourage people, if they were wanting to like work in this way, is it's really spending time practicing stuff when shit's not hitting the fan. It's like learning the techniques, learning how to feel the ground, learning what safety looks like, learning how to be embodied when shit's easy, when you're not stressed, when you're not on psychedelics, and building that muscle. And because it's something like, there's an element of like it, especially at first, it requires like a conscious intention to do it. Like it's consciously competent, right? You're intending to do it. But over time, I mean, I do feel like a lot of this stuff is very instinctual over time. And so as the more it's practiced, the more it just becomes a natural way of being. It's not really a technique. It's more just you. It's how you're meant to be, is feeling, not thinking all the time. So the more someone gets to that level where it's just integrated into, it's just who they are, then they go in and take mushrooms or ayahuasca or even 5-MeO, I wonder, and some of these things are just going to kick in automatically. Like it's just like an automatic instinct. That to me is like that's the goal. That's that's with all of this work. Like, you have an ayahuasca ceremony. Like, the goal isn't to be consciously trying to think about that thing or work with that thing all the time. Eventually, you want it to it's just done. It's you. It's who you are. So
it's integrated.
It's integrated.
Yeah, it's not a part of yourself that's outside of you or outside of your conscious awareness. Right. And through the somatic work, right? Because one could say that in the body below the neck is for a lot of people where the subconscious or the unconscious lies. Right. And so when we start to open up that element, then these aspects of selves that have been sort of tucked away or traumatized or whatever can come to the surface and be integrated as a full sense of self.
Absolutely. I mean, that was what, like with those coaches, like what happened with them. It was around January 2020. I started doing some of the somatic stuff. And I remember it was right before I started doing it, I don't remember feeling that much other than just a bit out of sorts. Started doing the somatic stuff and I felt two things. One was just grief because I realized, the girl I was dating at the time, they'd gotten in her head. It was very messy. And I realized it was too late. They'd done too much to her with her where she's just going to think I'm paranoid. Right. So I was heartbroken, really, as I realized that was probably when I realized this is probably the end of the relationship. 4 years. And rage was the other thing. I felt just absolute rage as I started to realize and put the dots together at what had happened with these people. And all of that came from it was really just feeling the ground, looking around, like learning what it felt like to be in my body. And once I did that, whatever was right, that stuff was right at the surface. It's like, oh, hello. Here's your rage. Here's some grief. Spent one Sunday afternoon crying for hours after not having any of that for ages. So, yeah, all this stuff's in the body. This is why, like, up until that point, I'd meditated, I'd journaled heaps, I'd read plenty of self-help books, I'd had therapy, coaching, all kinds of different things. But I think in like 1 or 2 weeks of doing the somatic stuff, the really simple techniques, it changed everything. Whereas I'd been meditating for 10 years and I was like, I felt like I couldn't go this deep just with meditation ever. So
here we are. So tell us a little bit. So, those who are listening at home, if they want to learn more about this, if they want to sort of get a sense of the intersection and overlap of psychedelics and somatics, start to look into some practice, what's sort of your recommendation in terms of further steps to take from here, kind of actionable, practical steps for them to take?
Actionable, practical steps. Well, I've, off the back of all this, I've started a program called Rageheart, where you can learn about how to do all this. There's not really many people teaching it. That's partly why I'm doing it. Then I'm trying to do it in a very different way. I find like this whole spiritual healing space it's very light and airy and touchy-feely. Like what I've tried to do with Rageheart is really put a different spin on it where it's going to be hard work. I tell people it's not for the faint of heart. Like you can go and meditate, you can do lots of things that aren't going to take you into your body, into the demons of the past. This somatic stuff will, and it's very, very good at it. And in the long run, it's incredible. It's one of the coolest things I feel like I've found in life. But the path there it can be a roller coaster. But if you want to learn more about that and how I work, that's at Rageheart. I like Braveheart, but rageheart.co. And you check out the homepage. There's some more information about how it works. And there's a daily rage, I call it, like a daily email newsletter. But I mean, if people can check that out, if that doesn't resonate,
and John's great at writing the daily email newsletter. I'd say it's worth signing up just for that to get a.
I've done it for a long time. This kind of thing,
writing capacity. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
But I mean, if I don't resonate, I mean, there's plenty of books. Peter Levine is a fantastic guy to check out if you prefer to start with a book. There's stuff on YouTube. I'll be launching a podcast soon for Rageheart. The whole way I'm sort of putting Rageheart together, instead of it being like about trauma or focusing on like the problem, is at least right now, I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. Is the whole framing is unleash the beast. The idea that being whoever we are, it's not about making money or being anything specific, but about getting out of our own way and getting rid of all the bullshit. It's the same thing the plants do. It's just framed in a different way. But this is about being the very best version of you, whoever the hell that is. That's what the whole thing is about. It's not about getting rid of stress. That's how we get there. It's really about remembering who you are. That's been what the plants have been about to me. that's to me what it always comes back to, is remembering who we are. That's Rageheart.
Rageheart.co.
Rageheart.co. No, I haven't got the .com yet.
All right. Daily email newsletter that
Monday to Friday at the moment. Yeah. It's a Monday to Friday. So that'll explain a bit more about how it works. There's some tips in there about how to do it.
Okay.
And then, that's the best place to begin.
And then any books by Peter Levine? I forget, what's his most...
Waking the Tiger is probably the main one.
Waking the Tiger.
Really cool idea. It's the same like Unleashing the Beast. The idea is that animals in the wild don't get PTSD, at least at the same rates that humans do, even though they're in the... they shake it off. They're just better at being stress-free. Maybe it's shaking or running, or they're not like if they get angry, they express it. Like they don't people please. You don't see a tiger in the jungle people pleasing, or if they're scared, they run away. Whereas humans, we're like, no, I can't say that. No. We hold it all in without even realizing it. Exactly. Way too civilized.
Too domesticated. Too domesticated.
You know what? There was one time, I can finish on this maybe, but one time when the rage came up, there's been a ton of it. I was with my dad in Australia. Dad's got a farm. We went out to the farm and I could feel this thing moving. I'm like, oh shit, I need to have a session, have a moment. So Dad goes off to the house and I'm walking through the farm. You get him to drop me off at the gate. So I'm on my own. Long grass, and this thing starts coming on. And for some reason, I don't know what made me do it. I start doing the growling, I didn't have a blanket, so I couldn't rip anything in half. But I started crouching and almost for some reason started beating my chest like a gorilla. Like I'm like, as I'm beating my chest, I'm also growling with this very primal thing, and then crawling through the grass as though I'm hunting some animal. It was fucking great. And then I remember I got home and I was describing it to someone. I'm like, some of those moments I've never felt so spiritual and yet so animalistic at the same time. There's something about the way someone described it once to me. It was like, instead of going up to reach spiritual source, whatever you want to call it, we're going down into the body, down into the earth. And there's so much magic in that. So be a gorilla or a beast.
Be a gorilla. I love it. All right. Rageheart.co. John.
Rageheart.co.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Paul.
On the podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the third wave of psychedelics, subscribe to this channel and visit thethirdwave.co, where you'll find plenty of free resources on intentional and responsible psychedelic use.